I think we should separate.
Lorraine Hayes stood in her kitchen on a Tuesday evening in April 2020. The light was fading outside, the kind of spring evening where you can't tell if it's still day or if night is coming. Thomas was sitting at the kitchen table. She stood near the counter, her hands at her sides. They had been married for 21 years. She said 4 words. I think we should separate. That was all. 4 words. I think we should separate. Thomas's face didn't change immediately. There was a beat of absolute silence in the kitchen. Then his breathing shifted. His hand went to his chest, fingers spreading flat against his shirt. His jaw tightened, and then he started to cry. Not dramatic crying. Quiet, desperate crying. The kind of crying that sounds like someone is drowning. He said, "My blood pressure is going through the roof right now. Can you feel what you're doing to me? I'm dizzy. I can't breathe. If you do this, if you leave me, I won't manage my medication. I won't take my insulin. I'll let everything fall apart. You know what that means. You're a nurse. You know what happens to people like me, without someone managing things. My diabetes will spiral. My blood pressure will spike. I could have a heart attack. You'd be responsible for my death." His voice was shaking. His hands were shaking. He was genuinely distressed in that moment. And Lorraine believed him, the way she had believed him 43 times before. He continued, "I can't live without you. I'll fall completely apart. You'll be responsible for whatever happens to me. You know what that means. You know my family history. You know what can happen. If you leave, I'll stop managing my health. I won't have the will to live, and that will be on you." Lorraine had heard variations of this speech so many times over so many years that she could anticipate the rhythms and the specific moments where his voice would crack. She knew the words. She knew what came next. She knew that if she had any compassion at all, she would back down. She would tell him she didn't mean it. She would tell him they were fine. She would stay. But this time, something was different. This time, Lorraine didn't immediately say she was sorry. She didn't immediately assure him that she wasn't leaving. She didn't immediately take back her words and promise to keep managing his life. This time she was quiet. This time she let the silence sit in the room between them. And Thomas, not knowing what to do when his threat didn't result in immediate capitulation, just kept crying. He kept saying the same things over and over, like he was running through the script, but it wasn't working anymore. Like the words that had kept Lorraine in place for 2 decades were suddenly just words, and Lorraine was no longer listening to the threat. She was listening to the manipulation underneath it. That silence changed everything. To understand how Lorraine stayed, you have to understand who Lorraine was before she stayed. In 1997, Lorraine Hayes was 25 years old. She was in nursing school. She was fierce and independent and capable. She had plans. She was going to be an excellent nurse. She was going to save lives. She was going to build something meaningful. Her mother had struggled with depression for Lorraine's entire childhood. Lorraine's father left when she was young, when her mother's illness got too difficult for him to manage. So it was just Lorraine and her mother in an apartment in their city. And from the time Lorraine was very small, she learned something fundamental. It was her job to hold things together. When Lorraine was 11 years old, her mother had a breakdown. She couldn't get out of bed. She couldn't work. She couldn't function. Lorraine came home from school and made dinner. She made sure her mother took her medication. She sat with her mother on nights when her mother was scared. She was 11 years old, and she was the adult in the house. Her mother survived, but that collapse taught Lorraine something about the world. Love meant managing crisis. Care meant holding someone together. Compassion meant sacrificing your own needs to prevent someone else's catastrophe. By age 11, Lorraine had learned that her job was to be the strong one. Her job was to notice when people were falling and to catch them. When Lorraine was 16, her mother attempted suicide. Lorraine found her. Lorraine called 911. Lorraine rode in the ambulance and sat in the hospital waiting room thinking, "I should have been more vigilant. I should have noticed the signs. I should have prevented this." Her mother survived, but something broke in Lorraine. She carried a belief that would shape the next 20 years of her life. It was her job to keep people alive. If someone she loved was in danger, It was her fault if she didn't save them. She became a nurse. She was an excellent nurse. She worked in critical care. She saved lives. Every shift was a balance between caring for her patients and managing her own certainty that she was responsible for keeping them alive. This worked in the hospital. In the hospital, this drive to save people was an asset. This drive to notice crisis and respond was exactly what her job required. She was good at her job. She was very good at it. But this was the vulnerability that would later be exploited. In 1997, Lorraine went to a community center dance. She was dragged there by a friend. She wasn't the type to go to dances, but her friend insisted. Lorraine was wearing a red dress. She was standing near the wall when Thomas approached her. He was handsome. He was charming. He was funny. He worked as a factory supervisor, which meant he had a stable job and good income and ambition. He made her laugh.
Hello, I'm
They
Thomas,
danced.
and I just had to come
He asked
over.
for her
You look
number.
really beautiful
He
in
called
that
the
red
next
dress.
day.
Oh,
For
thank
2
you.
years,
I'm Lorraine.
Thomas was everything Lorraine needed him to be. He was attentive and affectionate. He told her he loved her. He made plans with her. He introduced her to his family. He seemed like someone who had his life together. He seemed like someone who didn't need saving. He seemed like a partner. And for Lorraine, who had spent her entire life managing crisis and catastrophe, a partner who didn't need managing felt like luxury. They married in 1999. Lorraine was 27. Thomas was 31. They had a small wedding. Lorraine's mother was there, having a good year that particular year. They bought a house. They built a life together. For the first year of marriage, things were genuinely good. Thomas still seemed stable. He still seemed like a partner. He still seemed like someone who wanted to build something with her. Then, around year 2 of marriage, things began to change. It was subtle at first. Thomas's mood became unpredictable. He started drinking more than he used to. He became controlling about small things. Where Lorraine went, who she could see, what she wore to work. He told her she was cold when she wanted to maintain friendships with people outside the marriage. He said her nursing friends were a bad influence. He said she cared more about other people than she cared about him. Lorraine tried to accommodate. She spent more time at home. She was available when he wanted her to be available. She pulled back from her friendships to avoid triggering his jealousy. She thought this was what marriage was. She thought this was what love looked like, after the first rush of newness wore off. He blamed her for his stress at work. When he had a difficult day, when his boss criticized him or his work didn't go well, it was because of something Lorraine did or didn't do. She had made his day stressful by not being supportive enough. She had hurt his feelings by not asking about his work. She had caused his mood to be fragile by suggesting they spend time with her friends. She internalized this blame. She tried to manage his mood by managing her own behavior. She tried to prevent his bad days by being more attentive, more available, more everything. Around year 5 of marriage, something shifted. Thomas was diagnosed with hypertension and type 2 diabetes. His doctor told him the conditions were manageable. Millions of people manage these conditions successfully. He needed medication, diet management, and regular exercise. It was serious, but it was manageable. Thomas was in his mid-30s. He was a healthy man. These conditions didn't have to define his life or limit his future. But Thomas didn't manage them. He expected Lorraine to manage them for him. He would forget to take his medication and ask Lorraine to remind him. Then he started expecting her to actually administer his medication, laying out his pills for him each morning, making sure he took them. He would overeat and then blame Lorraine for not controlling what food was in the house. He would refuse to exercise and then tell Lorraine that her lack of support was the reason he wasn't taking care of himself. He developed a narrative in which his health was entirely Lorraine's responsibility. And Lorraine, with her professional nursing background, took this seriously. She knew what unmanaged diabetes and hypertension could do. She knew the complications: kidney disease, nerve damage, heart disease, stroke. She knew the risks. She was terrified. So she started managing his health for her. She researched his conditions. She monitored his diet. She encouraged exercise. She made sure he took his medication. She learned his symptoms and his warning signs. She became a nurse not just in her professional life, but in her marriage. She became his health manager. This became her job. This became her role in the marriage. And Thomas never had to take responsibility for his own health, because Lorraine was doing it for him. Around year 5 of marriage, Thomas made his first explicit threat. Lorraine had suggested they see a couples therapist. Something felt wrong in the marriage. She couldn't articulate it, but the dynamic was shifting. The man she had married seemed to be slowly disappearing, and someone else was taking his place. She thought therapy might help them understand what was happening. She brought it up carefully. She said, "I think it might be good for us to talk to someone about our relationship, just to make sure we're communicating well." Thomas's response was immediate and sharp. He said, "My blood pressure is already too high. If you stress me out with this idea of therapy, if you push me to talk about our relationship as if something is wrong with me, my health will suffer. You know that. You're a nurse. You know my condition is fragile. My blood pressure could spike. If you push me to go to therapy and dredge up problems, my health will deteriorate. You would be responsible." Then he said, "If you're not happy with me, maybe you should just leave. But if you leave, I'll fall apart completely. I won't manage my diabetes. I won't take my blood pressure medication. I'll drink myself into oblivion. You know what that will do to someone with my conditions. You'll be a murderer." He used that word specifically, murderer. Lorraine had never heard anything like it. She had never imagined that her suggestion to see a therapist would result in a threat that she would be responsible for his death if she pursued it. She backed down immediately. She apologized. She told him she didn't need therapy. She told him everything was fine. She meant it sincerely. She had no idea that this single moment would be the first of 43 similar moments across the next 16 years. The threat worked perfectly, and Thomas learned exactly what he needed to say to keep Lorraine compliant. Whenever she tried to set a boundary, whenever she tried to assert her own needs or her own perspective, Thomas would invoke his health conditions and threaten his emotional collapse. And Lorraine, terrified, would back down. Over the years, this became their dance. It became ritualistic and predictable. Lorraine would attempt a boundary. Thomas would threaten his health or his emotional state. Lorraine would capitulate. Thomas would have won. The cycle would repeat. Specific incidents across different years show how this mechanism worked and how it escalated over time. In 2008, Lorraine wanted to take a women's nursing retreat weekend with her colleagues. She'd been invited to go with a group of nurses she worked with. It was one weekend. It was professional development. It was important to her. She asked Thomas if it was okay for her to go. Thomas said, "My stress will go through the roof if you're gone. You know my blood pressure. I'll probably have a panic attack while you're away. My heart can't handle this stress. I need you here. I need you managing my health. If you leave me alone for a weekend, something could happen to me, and it will be your fault." Lorraine didn't go. She stayed home and managed Thomas's anxiety and blood pressure through her presence. She called the conference organizers and told them she couldn't make it. She didn't tell them why. She just said something had come up. In 2010, Thomas was laid off from his job. This was a real crisis. He had been working as a factory supervisor for years, but the company downsized. He lost his job, and after that, he struggled to maintain consistent employment. He would find work and then quit. He would get hired and then stop showing up. Lorraine tried to be supportive, but she also gently suggested that maybe he should pursue vocational training, maybe learn a new skill that would give him better job security. Thomas's response was swift. He said, "You think I'm worthless. You think I'm a failure. If you push me to do vocational training, to admit I'm not good enough, I'll fall apart. I can't handle the emotional weight of failing again. If you make me face my failures, I'll stop taking my insulin. I'll stop managing my blood pressure. I'll let everything go. You'll come home and I'll be hospitalized or worse." Lorraine apologized immediately. She told him she didn't think he was worthless. She told him she believed in him. She said she didn't know why she suggested the training. She became his sole financial provider. She started working extra shifts to cover his lost income and his debts. And she never suggested vocational training again. She never suggested anything that might hurt his feelings or challenge his perspective of himself. In 2014, Lorraine's sister invited her to a family trip to Georgia. It was a week-long visit. Lorraine's extended family was going to be there. Her nieces and nephews, her cousins, people she missed. She wanted to go. Thomas said, "My health can't handle you being gone for a week. If you leave me alone that long, I won't manage my medications. My blood sugar will spike. You know what unmanaged diabetes does. Within a week I could be hospitalized or dead. You know this. You're a nurse. You know what can happen. And you're telling me you're going to leave me alone in this condition so you can go have fun with your family." He also said, "I can't survive without you here managing things for me. You're the only thing keeping me alive. You're the only thing that matters." Lorraine's sister was horrified when she found out why Lorraine wasn't coming to Georgia. Her sister told her, "This is not okay. He's manipulating you. You need to go. You need to leave him." Lorraine defended Thomas. She said he wasn't manipulating her. He was genuinely struggling with his health and his emotions. She said she couldn't abandon him when he was struggling. She canceled her trip. This was the pattern. Lorraine would attempt something for herself. Thomas would threaten his health or his emotional collapse. Lorraine would sacrifice what she wanted to manage his crisis. And nothing ever changed. Thomas never actually fell apart. His conditions never actually deteriorated in the catastrophic way he predicted. But Lorraine never found out. She never stood firm long enough to see what actually happened when she didn't capitulate. And so she kept capitulating. Before we go any further, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We read every single one, and if this story is hitting close to home, make sure you're subscribed so you never miss what's coming next. The pattern stretched across decades, 20 years of management, 20 years of Lorraine's life organized around preventing Thomas's crisis, 20 years of sacrificing her own needs to manage his health and his emotions. What did it look like to actually live as Lorraine during those years? Lorraine would work 12-hour shifts in critical care nursing. She would save lives at the hospital. She would manage life and death situations. She would be the person who noticed when a patient's vital signs were changing. She would be the person who responded to crises quickly and calmly. She would be excellent at her job. Then she would come home. And the first thing she would do was assess Thomas's mood and his blood sugar levels. She would look at his face and try to determine if he'd taken his medication that day. She would ask him about his blood pressure. She would check his glucose monitor. She would modify her own behavior based on what she found. If he seemed irritable or his blood sugar was high, she would adjust her evening to accommodate his emotional state. She wouldn't mention work stress. She wouldn't ask him about his day in a way that might lead to him feeling criticized. She would cook the meals he wanted to eat. She would ensure that his environment was calm and stable. She didn't leave him alone for extended periods because she was afraid of what he might do. She used her nursing knowledge to constantly assess his risk. Is he actually at risk? Should I call 911? Is this a genuine health crisis or is this manipulation? She couldn't answer those questions, so she stayed vigilant. She blamed herself when he drank or became angry. She took responsibility for his emotions as if they were her job to manage. She slowly isolated from her own support system to avoid triggering his jealousy. Over the years, she lost touch with most of her friends. She stopped going to events that didn't include Thomas. She made excuses for why she couldn't attend things. She covered his unpaid bills and his debts. She became not just his nurse, but his financial provider, his emotional manager, his crisis preventer. Her body was breaking down. She gained weight from stress. She developed high blood pressure. She had anxiety attacks during nursing shifts. Her own cardiac health was deteriorating. She developed atrial fibrillation, an irregular heartbeat that her doctor said was stress-induced. She was in her 40s, having cardiac symptoms because she was managing someone else's emotional state 24 hours a day. Her professional performance was suffering. She couldn't focus on her patients because she was worried about Thomas. She couldn't stay late to finish charting because she needed to get home to manage his evening. She called him from work to check on him. She checked her phone obsessively for messages from him. But she never left. She never faced the possibility that her management of his health and emotions was actually preventing him from taking responsibility for his own life. She never asked herself the question that might have changed everything. What happens if I stop managing his life? In 2018, Lorraine started keeping a journal. She wasn't keeping a journal specifically to document the threats. She was trying to process her feelings. She was trying to understand what was happening to her, why she felt so trapped, why she couldn't leave even though she felt like she was dying. But as she wrote, she started numbering the threats. Threat number 1 was from 2003. Threat number 2 was from the same year. As she wrote, she documented each one. The dates. The exact words Thomas had used. Her response. What happened after? By 2019, she had documented 43 threats. Some of them were, if you work overtime, my diabetes will spiral, and I won't be here when you get back. Or, your friends are more important to you than my health. That's why my condition is getting worse. Or, if you mention divorce again, I'll stop taking all my medication. You know what that means. Or, I can't live like this. I'll fall completely apart. My blood pressure will kill me if you leave me. 43 times across 16 years, Thomas had explicitly threatened that his health would deteriorate or that he would emotionally collapse if Lorraine set a boundary or pursued her own needs. And here was the thing that Lorraine was beginning to realize, reading through her journal. The threats never resulted in actual consequences. Every time she bent to his threat, nothing changed. Every time she sacrificed something to keep him from falling apart, he remained stable. Every time she capitulated and stayed home, instead of going somewhere she wanted to go, his blood pressure didn't spike. Every time she worked extra shifts to cover his debts, instead of pursuing something for herself, his diabetes didn't deteriorate. She'd been reading through a year of entries, and she realized he'd never actually experienced the consequences he predicted. She couldn't deny it anymore. The pattern was clear. The evidence was in her own handwriting. 43 threats. 0 actual consequences. Something had to change. In late 2019, Lorraine finally went to therapy. She'd resisted it for years because Thomas said therapy would stress him out, and if therapy stressed him out, it would affect his health conditions. But something shifted in her. She needed help. She needed someone to help her understand what was happening to her. Her therapist was a woman named Dr. Patricia Williams. She was African American, in her late 50s, and she specialized in trauma and codependency. Lorraine sat in her office for the first time and felt the kind of relief that comes when you finally talk to someone who might understand. Dr. Williams asked Lorraine to describe a recent situation. To walk her through what happened, Lorraine told her about incident number 43, which had happened just months earlier. In April 2019, Lorraine had asked Thomas for a divorce. She'd been thinking about it for years. She'd been thinking about leaving. And finally, she'd said the words. Thomas had responded by having a panic attack. He said his heart was racing. He said he thought he was having a heart attack. He said to Lorraine, "This is what you're doing to me. You're killing me. If I die, everyone will know you murdered me by leaving." He also said, "I'll fall completely apart. I won't eat. I won't take any of my medications. I'll let everything go. Within a month I'll be hospitalized or dead." Lorraine was terrified. She'd called 911. The hospital had assessed him. His vital signs were elevated from anxiety, but there was no cardiac event. He was fine. There was no heart attack. There was nothing medically wrong with him. But Lorraine still blamed herself. She still thought she'd pushed him to this point. Dr. Williams listened to all of this, and then she asked a simple question. How many times has he made threats about his health or his emotional state? Lorraine said, 43 times. Dr. Williams asked, how many times have those threats resulted in an actual medical crisis? Lorraine said, 0. Dr. Williams asked, so when he threatens that his blood pressure will spike, or his diabetes will deteriorate, or that he'll fall apart emotionally, what actually happens?
Back at that moment, who were
Lorraine
you really
thought
trying
about
to
this.
protect?
She tried to remember a time when she'd actually stood firm and not capitulated. She struggled. She'd backed down so many times that she couldn't clearly remember what happened when she didn't. Dr. Williams said, let me ask you something different. When you're not there managing his health, when you're at work for 12 hours, and you're not reminding him to take his medication or checking his blood sugar, does his health actually deteriorate? Lorraine said, no. He manages it fine. Dr. Williams said, so he's capable of managing his own health and his own emotions. He's shown you that by managing them when he chooses to manage them. When he doesn't have you there to manage them for him, he manages them fine. Is that accurate? Lorraine said yes. That was accurate. The times when she was unavailable, he managed. He took his medication. He monitored his blood sugar. He got through the day. Dr. Williams said, then he's not in crisis. He doesn't have a medical emergency that requires your constant management. He's using coercion. He's using your professional knowledge against you. He's weaponizing his actual medical conditions to control you. And you've believed him, because you're a nurse, and you know his conditions are serious. But here's the truth. His conditions are manageable. He's shown you that. He manages them when he chooses to. Your job is not to manage his health. Your job is not to manage his emotions. And your job is absolutely not to sacrifice your own health to prevent him from doing the things he threatens to do. Lorraine cried in that therapy session. She cried because she'd spent 20 years believing one thing, and now she was hearing something different. She'd spent her entire professional and personal identity being the person who saves people. She'd believed it was her responsibility to keep people alive. She'd believed it was her duty to prevent Thomas from falling apart. And now Dr. Williams was telling her something radical. You can't save someone who won't save himself, and you can't die trying. Over the next 3 months, Lorraine went to that therapy office twice a week. She called a domestic abuse hotline and spoke with a counselor. She learned about the pattern of coercion. She learned that what Thomas was doing had a name. It was abuse. It wasn't dramatic abuse. It wasn't the kind of abuse that makes bruises you can show people. But it was abuse. It was control. It was manipulation. It was coercion using threats. She created a safety plan with the counselor. She talked to her sister. She started researching apartments. She set aside money away from the joint account, a small amount each paycheck. She made a decision. She was going to leave. And when she left, she was going to do it in a way that didn't allow Thomas to threaten her into staying. On a Tuesday evening in April 2020, Lorraine executed her plan. She had been planning this for 3 months. She'd done the research. She'd made the arrangements. She'd created the safety plan. Here's what she did. She called 911 before she told Thomas she was leaving. She told the dispatcher, "My husband has a history of making threats when I set boundaries. I'm about to tell him I'm leaving him. He will likely threaten that his health will deteriorate or that he'll fall apart. I'm asking you to send a wellness check after I tell him, just to make sure everyone is safe." The dispatcher said they would send officers. Lorraine hung up. Her heart was racing. Her hands were shaking. She was about to do something she'd been unable to do for 43 times before. She was about to tell Thomas she was leaving, and she was going to mean it. Thomas was sitting at the kitchen table. Lorraine stood near the counter. She said, "I'm leaving. I've made arrangements. I'm going to stay with my sister. Our marriage is over." She said it calmly. She said it with finality. She said it like she meant it. Thomas's response was immediate. He said, "My blood pressure is going to kill me. I can't handle this. If you leave, I'll fall apart. I won't take my medications. I won't manage my diabetes. You're destroying me. You're killing me. You know what this means. You know my conditions. My blood pressure could spike into a stroke. My diabetes could cause kidney failure. I could die, and it will be your fault." He was panicked. He was angry. He said everything he'd ever threatened to say. He told her she was abandoning him. He told her she was a terrible wife and an even worse person. He told her his blood pressure was already through the roof, that she could literally see his pulse in his neck, that he was in crisis. And Lorraine said something she'd never said before. "I've already called 911. They're on their way. If you're genuinely in crisis, they can help you. If you're not, the hospital can assess you. Either way, this is no longer my job." She meant it. She said it with calm certainty. She said it with the kind of firmness she'd never used before in response to his threats. Thomas was furious. He couldn't process what was happening. His threat wasn't working. The thing that had kept Lorraine in place for 43 times wasn't working now. He kept trying. He kept escalating. He kept threatening. But Lorraine wasn't listening anymore. The police arrived within 10 minutes. They did a wellness check. They talked to Thomas. They asked him if he had any plans to hurt himself or others. He said no. He said it was all a misunderstanding. He said he was just upset about the separation. The police left. Lorraine left. She packed 2 suitcases. She got in her car and drove to her sister's house. And Thomas did not fall apart. He did not fall apart in the way he'd been predicting for 2 decades. He got angry. He lawyered up. He told mutual friends that Lorraine was cruel and heartless. He started dating someone new within weeks. Within a month of Lorraine leaving, he was living his life. He managed his medications. His blood pressure was stable. His diabetes was manageable. He was functioning. He was fine. He'd always been fine. Lorraine moved into her sister's guest house in April 2020. The divorce was finalized in 2021. For the first year, Lorraine was a wreck. She was grieving. She was grieving the marriage she'd tried to save. She was grieving the person she thought Thomas was. She was grieving the 20 years she'd given to managing his life. She was also furious. She was angry at Thomas for lying to her. She was angry at herself for believing him. She was angry at the system that had allowed this pattern to continue without anyone stopping her. She was guilt-ridden. She questioned her decision constantly. Did she do the right thing? Was she cruel? Should she have stayed? Should she have tried harder? Should she have given him more time? Her body was rebelling. She had panic attacks. She couldn't sleep. She developed stress-induced eczema that covered her arms and legs. She'd wake up in the middle of the night convinced that something was wrong, that Thomas was in crisis, that she'd made a terrible mistake. Her cardiac arrhythmia actually improved once she was away from the constant stress of managing him. Her body was recovering. But her mind was still in crisis. Lorraine went to therapy twice a week. She joined a support group specifically for people who'd been controlled through health and emotional breakdown threats. It wasn't a suicide survivors group. It wasn't a group for people who'd experienced other kinds of abuse. It was a group for people exactly like her, people who'd been coerced through threats of health deterioration and emotional collapse. In therapy and in the support group, she had to confront something painful. Her guilt was about Thomas, but it was mostly about herself. She'd spent 20 years believing that it was her job to keep him alive. Leaving meant accepting that his life was not her responsibility. Leaving meant accepting that if he chose to not manage his health, if he chose to let it deteriorate, that was his choice, not her failure. Leaving meant accepting that if he fell apart emotionally, that was his crisis to manage, not hers. This was harder than actually leaving. About 6 months after she left, Lorraine ran into Thomas at a grocery store. She wasn't expecting it. She was in the produce section looking at tomatoes when she saw him at the other end of the aisle. He was with someone else, a woman Lorraine didn't know. He was smiling, he was laughing, he was living his life. He looked healthy, he looked fine. And it hit Lorraine all at once. He'd always been fine. Every time she thought his health would deteriorate without her, it didn't, because his health was never the real issue. His health was the excuse. The issue was control. He used her love for him, and her professional knowledge of medical crisis to control her. He used her vulnerability, her history with her mother, her belief that it was her job to save people. He used all of it, and it worked for 20 years. Through therapy and the support group, Lorraine began to understand something profound about herself. She'd spent 20 years practicing the skill of managing other people's health and emotions. She'd become an expert at reading vital signs and mood shifts. She'd become an expert at de-escalating crises. She'd learned to absorb blame. She'd learned to take responsibility for someone else's state of being. She'd learned to sacrifice her own needs to prevent someone else's crisis. This skill had come from her mother. It had been reinforced by her profession, but it had been weaponized by Thomas. And she had to learn something completely new. She had to learn boundaries. She had to learn to say, I cannot manage your health. I cannot manage your emotions. That is your responsibility. She had to learn that someone else's medical condition was not her crisis to solve. She had to learn that someone else's emotional dysregulation was not her job to prevent. She had to learn that saying no was not selfish. She had to learn that her compassion was being exploited, and that recognizing that exploitation was not unkind. It was necessary. She had to learn that sometimes, the most compassionate thing you can do for someone is to refuse to enable them. In the first year after leaving, Lorraine moved out of her sister's guest house into her own small house. It wasn't anything fancy. It was small and modest, but it was hers. For the first time in 20 years, she had a space where she didn't have to manage anyone else's mood or health, a space where her own needs could come first, a space where she could breathe. She continued seeing her therapist weekly. She continued attending the support group. She was learning to live with boundaries. She was learning to tolerate the guilt that came with saying no. In the second year, Lorraine made a significant professional decision. She had been working in critical care nursing for nearly 30 years. It was work she'd loved. It was work she was excellent at. But the combination of her trauma and her ongoing cardiac issues made it unsustainable. The constant high-stress environment triggered her anxiety. She was unable to focus on her patients because she was managing the aftermath of her marriage. She transitioned to palliative care nursing, end-of-life care. It was different work. It still required compassion and skill and dedication, but it had different boundaries. She was helping people accept death, not trying to save them from it. She was learning to let things end. She was learning that sometimes the kindest thing you can do is help someone say goodbye. She worked part-time. For the first time in decades, she had time for her own life, time to rest, time to think, time to figure out who Lorraine was when she wasn't managing a crisis. In the third year, Lorraine did something unexpected. She took a pottery class at a community center. It was the same community center where she'd met Thomas 25 years earlier. She had no artistic background. She wasn't trying to become a famous artist. She just wanted to do something with her hands that had nothing to do with managing anyone else's life. She was terrible at pottery at first. She made lumpy bowls. She made lopsided vases. She made things that didn't work. But something about the work was meditative. She had to focus on her own hands, her own pressure, her own intention, not managing someone else's emotions or health, just creating something. Pottery became her place to process what she'd lived through. She would sit at the wheel for hours, making things, discarding things, trying again. The repetition was healing. The focus was healing. The creation was healing. In the fourth year, Lorraine started writing. Personal essays about codependency, about how health condition threats had become a control mechanism, about the difference between genuine mental health crisis and manipulation. She wrote about what it felt like to finally stop managing someone else's life. She wrote about learning boundaries. She submitted essays to magazines. Some were rejected. One was published in a health and wellness magazine. The article was titled, "The Quiet Cruelty of Emotional Threats: What I Learned Managing My Husband's Health." The response surprised her. Readers wrote to her saying, "I thought I was the only one this happened to. This is exactly what my partner does to me." Thank you for giving this a name. Lorraine realized there were others, many others. People trapped in relationships where they were managed through health crisis threats or emotional breakdown threats. People who'd been controlled through weaponized vulnerability. People who were sacrificing their own health to prevent someone else's crisis. Present day is 2024. Lorraine is 52 years old. She works part-time in palliative care. She lives in her own house. She sees her therapist monthly, not because she's in crisis, but for maintenance and ongoing processing of what she lived through. She has a partner. Her name is Andrea. Andrea is also African American, kind, and she has her own full life. Andrea is not someone who needs managing. Andrea is not someone who makes threats. Andrea is someone who loves Lorraine and supports her, and builds something with her, not someone who depends on her to hold everything together. When Lorraine met Andrea, she had to learn what a healthy relationship looked like. She had to learn that love didn't mean managing someone else's health and emotions. She had to learn that partnership meant mutual support, not one person sacrificing everything while the other person remained static. Lorraine makes pottery. Her pieces are good now. Not perfect, but intentional, beautiful in their imperfection. She displays them in her home. Lorraine writes. She has written a collection of essays about her experience. She is working on a longer piece, something more like a memoir. She has rebuilt friendships from before the marriage. She reconnected with people she'd lost touch with during her 20 years of managing Thomas's life. She has created boundaries with her extended family, learning to say no in ways that felt impossible before. She has one clear boundary now, one sentence that she comes back to again and again. I am not responsible for managing anyone's emotions but my own. This sounds simple. It took 20 years of marriage, plus 4 years of rebuilding to learn it. Lorraine doesn't talk about Thomas in public. She doesn't vilify him in conversations with people. She doesn't need to. She's not trying to destroy his reputation or prove he was wrong. She's not trying to make other people understand his failure. She's just living a life that's based on her own needs, instead of on managing someone else's crisis. And that, it turns out, is enough. This is what happens when someone finally stops choosing someone else's feelings over their own survival. This is what happens when someone realizes that compassion doesn't mean sacrificing yourself. This is what happens when someone decides that managing someone else's crisis is no longer her job. Lorraine Hayes is 52 years old. She's not famous. She's just a woman who learned to build a life based on her own needs instead of on preventing someone else's catastrophe. And she's found that it's enough. Like this video, subscribe to Wounds and Warnings so you don't miss the next story.